MK Ultra, Secret Drug War, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, MLK, Malcolm X, Marley, 27 Club, latest Leap Project. Subscribe today.
Folks, we have a real treat for you tonight. We have John Potash with us from johnpotash.com. We are going to discuss drugs as weapons against us, the CIA's murderous targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists. John, it's an honor to speak with you today here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Good. Thanks so much for talking to me about it, Rex.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit before the show. I'm fascinated with your work. I remember many years ago when Tupac got killed, and he seemed to be kind of on the forefront of many conspiracies for his day, or what we would call conspiracies now. And I remember the 27 Club. I researched that quite in depth, and it seems like these famous entertainers, they die at the age of 27. It's weird. And I don't know if there's any connection there with what you talk about. But if you would, please, for our audience, just give us a brief intro about yourself and why you decided to write about this stuff, because it's pretty intense.
Sure. Yeah, I graduated from college with a psychology major and went into addictions counseling, and then went back to school to the Columbia University School of Social Welfare because I knew I could study both counseling and sociology there, particularly under a great sociologist named Richard Cloward. And so I did that, and I studied community organizing, counseling, and sociology, and started a activist national social work newspaper there called Social Justice Action Quarterly, which won some awards in its brief 4 years. But then I got into publishing a few articles on Tupac and his, what I first thought was his targeting before he died, and what I thought was an FBI, COINTELPRO, FBI counterintelligence program targeting. But then after he died, I published a more extensive piece in Covert Action Quarterly, which was started by CIA whistleblower Phil Agee. And when I published that, people close to him urged me to turn it into a book. And so I had been working on a book with a theme of drugs as weapons against us, and Tupac was just one of a number of people that I was researching in that book. And that book was more about both Tupac, but also John Lennon, Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, and other musicians. And that was really, that book was going to become Drugs as Weapons Against Us, but I took a tangent and instead, finished a book just on Tupac, which became the FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, and came out with that in fall of 2007, and got a lot of good feedback on that, promoted it for a number of years, and then found a publisher for the first book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and I published that about a year ago with Trine Day. And so I've been on, I guess I've been broadcast on close to 1,000 radio programs because I've had some great, I've gone through a number of radio programs on the Pacifica Radio Network, but also was on Coast to Coast AM and Joyce Riley's Power Hour and a number of other syndicated radio programs that got me a lot of exposure on the FBI War on Tupac book, but then also on the Drugs as Weapons Against Us book.
When you started writing about this stuff, did you start getting kickback? I mean, did you notice black Suburbans slowly going past your house? Did you notice your phone going click, 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 click?
Well, I did have problems with my phone. I had problems with my mail. I had problems connecting with other, for example, a professor who wanted to do public relations for me. We couldn't connect by email all of a sudden at all. People I would send my the book, the FBI War on Tupac book, to, such as Joe Madison, who was a friend of this professor's, he never got it, or people who he told me to send it to, they would get the package without the book in it. Different things like that happened.
That's spooky.
So yeah, that was worrisome. But now my phone doesn't work at all today. I just, who knows why? But it's it's these things just happen here and there, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I'm still trying to get the word out, and sadly, it is a little scary just because of the people that have tried to get closest to the truth on Tupac's murder. Many of them have died, and the people that have written the most and the best works, I think, on the CIA's Operation MK Ultra, which is what my Drugs as Weapons Against Us book is kind of built around. Many of them have died also, so it is a little worrisome.
Geez, may the force be with you, man. I'm thinking of that TV series Stranger Days that recently came out on Netflix, and they full on show you all sorts of MK Ultra stuff that used to be done back in the day. I know they've got their own Hollywood spin to it, but let's jump into your work, because I'm looking through some of these bullet points right now, and I'm just getting blown away by looking at this stuff, the connections that you've made. Let's talk about how you were able to find out that the U.S. intelligence has been the largest LSD trafficker in the world. I remember back 20 years ago, 25 years ago in high school when, every once in a while you'd see somebody that was tripping on acid or something like that. And I heard rumors that LSD, if you got caught with a hit of acid, it was a manslaughter charge.
Yeah, I tell you, I have some of the source books right around me. So I can pull some of them out for you if you want. One of the best books, source books for my work was Martin Lee, founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting's book, Acid Dreams. I don't know if you can see it here, but I got that right here.
Uh-huh.
Another book, an excellent book, is Operation Julie by Dick Lee and Colin Pratt. Dick Lee was the lead investigator, high-level police detective in London, who investigated the LSD ring that Ronald Stark was part of. And now Ronald Stark was arrested in Italy because he had LSD laboratories around the world. And when he was arrested in Italy, a judge who was presiding over his trial ended up being murdered. And the next judge that was dealing with his case ended up saying he let him go because Stark offered so many proofs that he was working for the CIA, or U.S. intelligence, I should say, since 1960. And so there's, Acid Dreams talks about Ronald Stark. Another book called Acid talks about Ronald Stark. Operation Julie talks about Ronald Stark, and they all talk about him as working for U.S. intelligence and the largest acid trafficker in the world. And it names a number of other people involved in his network and their links to U.S. intelligence and the CIA's acid trafficking. Yeah.
Jeez. And so they started to give acid to specific people because they wanted to just basically see what it would do to them?
Well, it's Operation MK Ultra started in 1953. And there was, the list is huge, but it's probably around 100 sub-projects of Operation MK Ultra. But in the 1950s, they started with testing about 24 different drugs, and I list them in my book from the Army intelligence paper and their paper on the 1,000 or more Edgewood Arsenal soldiers who they tested all these 24 different drugs on. And then they surveyed them for years. And so they found that of all the drugs they were testing for use as quote-unquote unconventional warfare, they found that LSD was the one they most prized. And when they started they then started using them on hospital patients and people in jail, and also the common citizens. Now, it eventually got to the point that it became more and more operational to start getting musicians to use them, and that was revealed by A.E. Hotchner. A.E. Hotchner was editor of Ernest Hemingway. He was a great writer himself. He wrote a book called Blown Away, An Oral History of the Rolling Stones. And in that book, he says that Robert Lashbrook, he was deputy director of MK Ultra for the CIA, took loads of LSD, loads of agents, and loads of money to London and instructed his agents. And A.E. Hotchner actually quotes some of these agents that were instructed to put LSD in as many musicians' hands as possible. Now, why is not answered there. But the obvious reason is, why would they try to get as many musicians to use acid as possible? Because they're the best promoters of acid. They're the biggest, the most influence over the masses. And so that same year, in 1965, when Hotchner said that Lashbrook brought that acid to London, John Lennon and George Harrison were at George Harrison's dentist dinner party, just 6 of them having dinner together. And when George Harrison and John Lennon and their partners were about to leave to see a friend of his band, the dentist, Riley, Dr. Riley, says, you can't leave now. We've got this great coffee. You got to try. And so he gets him to stay a little bit longer to have this coffee. And then he says, well, you can't leave now because you're now tripping. And, you're just eating LSD. And George Harrison said, what's LSD? And John Lennon said, it's a drug. And he was furious. So that's how John Lennon got his first hit of acid. 2 years later, Mick Jagger gets his first hit of acid from an undercover FBI agent named Dave Schneiderman. And a London Daily newspaper says that that Schneiderman also worked for MI5, which is the British FBI. So this is some of the ways that these musicians got their first hits of LSD. And I show how the fact that now how did they get them to continue using LSD? Because with Jagger, after he took acid, police came down on his party and then put him under legal authority's thumb from that point thereafter. With Lennon, it took him a while to go back to try LSD again. And where did he do it? He did it in the Los Angeles, at a party in the Los Angeles music scene thrown by David Crosby and Roger McGuinn. And so then I get into David McGowan's work about how basically the Laurel Canyon scene was a scene that was cultivated by U.S. intelligence to kind of lure other musicians and artists to that scene to get them using many more drugs, and they would have sex parties and drugs there up a storm starting around 1964 onwards. So that's just some of the way they use acid. They use acid, they got musicians to use acid, they got them to promote it. Now, then when those musicians started sobering up and getting more into activism, because Mick Jagger was seriously against the Vietnam War, as was John Lennon, then they did them in. And I show that with Brian Jones, who was the founder of the Rolling Stones, and A.E. Hotchner talks about in detail and quotes eyewitnesses to the fact that Brian Jones, after he started sobering up and getting more into activism, he was drowned in his own swimming pool.
That's insane. And now if you watch Netflix, there's a new episode on Netflix trying to smear that Kurt Cobain was actually killed by his wife or his girlfriend, essentially. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but they're so good at spinning stuff with the media. They can come out with something on the news saying organic apples are bad for you. You need to put rate on it. They're like, okay.
Yeah, well, I that situation actually was, I believe, somewhat true. Believe it. I know it sounds preposterous, but Courtney Love's life is so bizarre that I show that she was at least a heroin addict and prostitute as a teenager. She admits this. She admits this in other biographies where she's quoted about being a sex slave for the Japanese mafia when she was still a teenager. She admits, going and prostituting herself in Asian countries while still a teenager. She was shooting heroin while still a teenager. I interviewed her biological father for hours to get all the sources for his information in his book about her, his daughter. And I got verification for his information that, believe it or not, when she was about 17 years old, she had brought 1,000 hits of acid to Dublin, where her father was doing research. And he incidentally, and he's embarrassed about saying it, but he introduced her to a guy who, that guy, when he was on his deathbed, admitted to Hank Harrison, that he was working for the CIA along with his brother. The guy's name was Steve O'Leary. His brother was Kevin O'Leary. And they proceeded to travel with the 17-year-old Courtney Love as she proceeded to pass out that acid all over the Liverpool music scene, and then continued to pass out drugs like candy all over a number of other music scenes for the rest of her life, basically. That was her modus operandi. And so it just, that and loads of more evidence show that she was working either consciously or not even realizing it, because she appears to have dissociative identity disorder, and a number of people have said this, but she was doing that for many, many years. And she introduced, kind of got Kurt using heroin daily for the first time. He had tried it a few times before, but she got him using it daily. And then when he sobered up, finding a cure to his stomach ailment about a year before his death, that's, in Rome, when he went to a coma in Rome, it was found that his blood test was actually, had showed no illegal substances whatsoever. That's when, they did him in. And she appears to have helped U.S. intelligence do him in.
Okay, so she might have actually been some type of MK Ultra project, and essentially a lot of times,
right.
Okay,
right.
Makes perfect sense. A sex slave in Japan, passing out drugs, hanging out with high-end echelon people, makes perfect sense. And why did he get taken out?
Well, Kurt Cobain was, he was into activism. He was against mainstream media. The only way I'm going to appear on the cover of Rolling Stone is if they allowed him to wear the T-shirt saying "corporate magazines still suck." He was
That's awesome.
He was into a number of activist causes, and I show a picture of that in my book. But he was into many activist causes that he just didn't talk a lot about. But I show some of them in my book, and And when he, but they thought they could control him with the heroin, U.S. intelligence, and he was the biggest promoter of heroin. Incidentally, he didn't want to be, but the levels of heroin use rose every year from the time Nirvana first got famous, when the people found out Cobain was using, until Cobain's death. And so I think that for those two reasons, when he got sober, he then threatened to promote sobriety, while threatening also to get more into the activism that he was into. And so those were some of the concerns about him.
Absolutely.
So, that fits a pattern. I'll just say the basic pattern on most of these musicians is that they're manipulated to promote drugs, but then when they sober up and get into more activism, that's when they're done away with. And that is the general pattern of most of these musicians, except for Paul Robeson, of course.
And another thing, too, that I'm wondering about, as far as the way that it seems like this thing's manipulated to the top levels, they pick people out that are really good musicians, and then they get them hooked on drugs. Therefore, that way they get everybody else to do drugs. And oh my gosh, it's just a whole system of control. They can arrest people for doing drugs. They can sell drugs. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And what I'm wondering is, also with Janis Joplin, too. I mean, let's get into some of these people. Janis Joplin also died of a heroin shot, too, didn't she?
Yeah, she died of what they call a hot shot, an overly pure dose of heroin. And her sister said she thinks that the CIA was behind it. But she was trying to sober up at that time. She'd gone and, she had cleaned herself up. She relapsed, but she was, working to get clean again. And she had also said on the Dick Cavett show that she planned to do some unprecedented stadium anti-war concerts where they were going to raise an unprecedented amount of money for the anti-war movement. And she had planned two of them, one in New York and one in Philadelphia. And so she got that hot shot right before she could do those concerts. But earlier in her life, an FBI guy who said he had worked for the FBI enters her life and gets her hooked on speed when she was younger. And she actually was engaged to the guy before she found out he had a whole double life going on, where he had a whole other family somewhere else. So that's just a example of how these undercover agents do what they do.
Absolutely. And what can you tell us about Lennon as far as the connections that he had? And it seemed like when he met
Yoko Ono,
yeah, it seemed like she kind of changed his perception. And I remember that song that came out that so many people boast about being Kumbaya, Imagine. But when I listen to this song, I think of like the Borg assimilating everybody. So you can look at it either way. But I mean, was that kind of the kill shot for him when he came out with that song? Did the powers that be say that's enough? I mean, that didn't really, it seems to me that would fit their agenda more, the New World Order, one world system agenda.
Well, what I think about him is they did manipulate him, obviously, to promote the LSD. And then she got him using heroin regularly for the first time in his life. At least he didn't use it before he met her, according to most biographies. Though I don't really implicate her, just because I don't know enough about her, except for the fact that she came from one of the wealthiest families in Japan, and some things like that. But I will say, though, that he apparently Marshall McLuhan, a media guru from Canada, he met him, according to a radio DJ who interviewed me right after I came out with this book. He told me about this. And McLuhan said that you've been used and manipulated to promote drugs, and that's what they're doing with you. And so he started wising up, and he started getting more into activism. John Lennon, they went to hibernation for a number of years to raise his son for about 5 years. But when he came out of hibernation, he sent out a press release that he'll be part of a strike, leading a protest strike, protest march, by the Teamsters in San Francisco, and will be playing music there. And he was also coming out with 2 albums at that time. And at that time, Reagan was just coming into office, the Reagan administration. And the leading biographer of John Lennon's assassination, Fenton Bressler, who was a lawyer and London Daily newspaper crime reporter, said that he believes that the CIA assassinated John Lennon because they were concerned about how much influence he would have against the Reagan administration and against the Reagan administration's policies, because John Lennon was 1 month away from getting his U.S. citizenship. And him coming into the spotlight again and getting right back into activism was a big concern.
Musicians must have a lot more power than most people think. And when you've got handlers and alphabet agencies controlling your every move, hooking you on drugs, bringing in MK Ultra agents to basically spy on you and control you, it really makes you realize and grasp the amount of power that a good musician has. And I guess if you really think about it, it makes sense, because if you reach 100 million people, 10 million people, they love your music, they get engulfed in it, and those lyrics are powerful, you can really grab some people's minds and change people's minds. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the CIA talks about changing people's hearts and minds because they'd rather control them that way than control them just physically. And so, the people with the biggest threat to that kind of influence is our musicians. Sure.
That's great. Hopefully now with the way things are going, I wonder if, because the media, the music industry especially, seems to be a lot different than it was 20, 30 years ago, just as far as because the internet, YouTube, if you're a good musician, you can just go to the internet and look it up, but you don't really have those powerhouses I see anymore quite as much, except for maybe a few people out there that have as much control. Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
That there's not as many iconic musicians these days?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Tupac. You look at Tupac and someone might just say, oh, he was just a rapper, but then there's so many people out there that know he had a lot more in-depth meaning on what he wanted to do. You talk about how there was a movement that Tupac wanted to convert gangs, essentially, like a conversion gang movement that cost billions of dollars of laundered drug money.
Right. Well, see, Tupac was probably the most unique of these musicians in the fact that Tupac was born into a radical leftist family, into what they called themselves was a revolutionary family at that time in the 1970s. And that was, his mother was one-time leader of the Harlem Black Panthers. His father was a Black Panther. His stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, had started the Republic of New Africa, which was a national black activist group. So Tupac, his mother, Afeni Shakur, said she raised Tupac to be the Black Prince of the Revolution. And so he was cultivated by his family to be a revolutionary. When a preacher in the area asked him what you want to be when you grow up, when he was about 12 years old, he said a revolutionary. And so he was a serious, activist from birth, virtually. And he never lost that activism. He was part of a group called the New African People's Organization that was started by former Black Panthers and former members of the Republic of New Africa. And when he was part of that group, when he reached the age of 17, he was then elected as the youngest chairman of a group called the New African Panthers, which was the young adult group of the New African People's Organization, and was essentially the same age as the Black Panthers when they first started. And so as head of the New African Panthers, when he was interviewed on the radio, he said, we're trying to replicate the Black Panthers, but without without making the same mistakes. So by the age of 17 and on to the age of 18, he was leading this group that was active in 8 cities. So he was already a national black activist leader before he became a known rapper. And that's where, it's obvious that, the FBI's counterintelligence program, their goal was to target all black, national black activist leaders. And they did that with him. And so people, they say the counterintelligence program was, ended in 1971 when a bunch of activists raided an FBI office and exposed it and stole all the documents and sent them all to the media and exposed it. But former COINTELPRO agents such as M. Wesley Swearingen says that they continued COINTELPRO, they just put it under different names. And so, and on into the 90s. And so here's Tupac, first as an activist leader, and then he starts touring with Digital Underground, does a national and international tour with them, and then lands his own solo rap debut CD. And immediately, within days of the MTV release of one of his political songs on that CD, he's attacked by Oakland police. They said for jaywalking, but they proceeded to choke him unconscious and bash his head against a curb. And I showed 2 other examples where people died in police custody from those police actions. So he was attacked from day one as a musician. And then after that, I show approximately 4 or 5 other murder attempts before he was actually killed. And I show evidence of U.S. intelligence involvement in all those murder attempts. And so the reason he's so misunderstood is partly his own doing. Because at a point in his career, somewhere around the finishing of his first CD or the beginning of his second CD, he decided to take on this gangsta persona. And he did this as part of a movement of his Black Panther extended family, which was directed at getting the Bloods and Crips the Bloods and Crips gangs, and that was started in Los Angeles, to call peace truces between each other and to turn on to activism. And that, as same thing as the Bloods and Crips had spread across the country, these activists got this peace truce movement to spread across the country, and the conversion to activist movement to spread across the country. And and the Young Lords got inspired by the Black Panthers doing this, and they convinced the Latin Kings, the largest gang in New York, to convert to activism. And this was documented by Columbia Press book. That was two professors published a book about that conversion. And so what this did, though, is this caused these gangs to stop dealing drugs in a major way. And Tupac being a major part of this in getting gang leaders to come together and shake hands at peace truce picnics and things like that. He was a major force and a major influence over the youth element in that regard. And so that's why he was such a danger, because he was taking away a lot of the drug dealers from the streets. And document the evidence that the CIA were the largest drug traffickers in the world, with opium, with heroin, with cocaine, along with the LSD we talked about earlier. And by getting these dealers to stop, dealing heroin and cocaine, it was taking loads of money out of the CIA's pockets. But it was, even more importantly, it was taking money out of the money launderers' pockets. Now, the money launderers, I show the documentation of how the banks are probably the biggest money launderers, but even a lot of large, multinational corporations have laundered loads of money through their cash sales, such as fast food restaurants and other places are involved in this money laundering. And I quote people like the United Nations head of investigation on drug trafficking and money laundering, about some of these statistics and facts that the U.S. is involved in between $500 billion and $1 trillion in money laundering, and a majority of that money is drug money laundering. And so I also quote an expert who was a top Wall Street trader named Catherine Alston Fitz, who happened to also be Assistant Secretary of Housing under George Bush Sr. And she says that the way it works with money laundering is that when you get that cash flow 1 year through money laundering, the stock value goes up between 20 and 30 times, because they believe, it's predicted that that company will make that much more money for 20 to 30 years. And so that's why all that cash, so she says that if you take 2 or 3 dealers on the street, they actually, when their money is laundered through multinational corporations and the stock value goes up, it actually increases the value of that laundered money going through those companies' stock portfolios by 20 or 30, to the point that those several dealers could actually increase the value of stocks for up to $1 million. So when you take the tens of thousands and maybe more hundreds of thousands of dealers that the Black Panther movement and Tupac inspired to convert to activism and stop drug dealing, you realize that he's taking billions and maybe tens of billions of dollars out of the hands of all these people laundering that money.
That's fascinating. And also, you talk about how Martin Luther King was taken out, how the Black Panthers have been systematically attacked. Maybe we could talk about some of that now with the Black Panthers and MLK.
Sure. Yeah, so the subtitle of my book, again, is The CIA's Murders, Targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and Other Activists. And SDS and the Panthers are very important in the book. Students for Democratic Society, I'll talk about next. But the Black Panthers were, basically started in 1966 with Huey Newton and Bobby Seale founding them in Oakland. They spread throughout the country, and they provided all kinds of free breakfast programs, free political education classes, housing rights work, did free health clinics, and all kinds of great programs to help blacks become more independent from the manipulation of kind of the wealthy whites that were trying to keep them under their thumb. And they were very successful with those programs, but because they were so successful in radicalizing a number of blacks and turning blacks against the Vietnam War and all that, the FBI came down on them very quickly. And one of the main way they came down on them is by shooting at them and arresting them en masse. But another way they manipulated them is by getting undercover agents into people's lives, such as Huey Newton's life and Afeni Shakur's life, and getting them to start using drugs and manipulating them that way. And they ruined Huey Newton's life that way. They ruined Afeni Shakur's life that way, Tupac's mother's life that way. She was addicted to crack for years before she got sober. And Huey Newton was diverted by cocaine problem himself. But then when he started to get back more into activism and actually, believe it or not, started strategizing with Tupac, first around Tupac's stepfather, Geronimo Pratt's release from jail. Geronimo Pratt was head of the Los Angeles Black Panthers. And Huey Newton was working to, at the end of his life, was working to help try to get Geronimo Pratt out of jail with Tupac. Tupac was already a teenager by then, already heading the New African Panthers by that point. And people on the East Coast of the Black Panthers were telling me that Huey Newton had contacted them about trying to restart the Black Panthers, believe it or not, in that late 1988, 1989 time frame, right before he was killed. And when Huey Newton was done away with, when he was killed, two bullets, one bullet was put in him to get him down the ground, and two bullets were put in his head, which is a military-style execution. And I show a number of factors around that and around his life to show how U.S. intelligence did that to him, manipulated him, got him on drugs, and then when he started getting out of that manipulation, they ended up assassinating him. But and I also show the network that was involved in manipulating Afeni Shakur, because when she right before she gave birth to Tupac, she actually represented herself in court in a famous trial. And that trial was called the New York Panther 21 trial. And it took the New York Black Panthers had thousands and thousands of members. And they took what they identified, what they thought were the top 21 leaders of the New York Black Panthers. And they arrested them on ridiculous charges. Like some of the charges including trying to blow up police stations, trying to blow up the botanical gardens of all things, as strange as that sounds. But they brought up tons of charges. They kept him in jail in what was the longest trial in New York history at that time. So they kept him in jail for about 2 years. They increased it. First, activists helped raise bail for people like Afeni and some of the other the New York 21 leaders. But eventually, the judge raised the bail so much no one could afford to get them out on bail, and they were stuck in jail for a while. But Afeni ended up representing herself in court. She was the only one. All the other Black Panther leaders got lawyers for themselves. But when it came to the jury's decision, the jury decided in about 2 hours, and they were interviewed afterwards and said they credited Afeni with her defense with getting them all off in jail. So she was heralded as this brilliant woman, because she was a brilliant woman, and she was invited to lecture in all the Ivy League schools and colleges all around the country, and she was doing great work in terms of legal work to bring up the charges against the New York Counterintelligence Program, to the point that those in New York they had the kind of most widespread, broadest restrictions on their police intelligence unit of any police unit in the country, and so. At some point, she ended up moving in with Mutulu Shakur, and that was Tupac's stepfather, who was an acupuncturist, who was leading drug detoxification and drug treatment through acupuncture in the Bronx. And so she was then, when Mutulu was targeted and had to go underground, Afeni was a guy came into her life named Legs Saunders. And it turns out Legs was a assistant to Nicky Barnes in cocaine dealing. Nicky Barnes was an understudy of a guy named Frank, I believe his name was Frank Matthews. And when Frank Matthews had previously gone to court, they found that about a dozen of his associates were let go in court because of their links to the CIA. So it just shows that network and the way that works. U.S. intelligence was linked to this Legs Saunders, who enters Afeni's life, puts a crack pipe in her mouth every time she came home from her work, and she developed her crack addiction, which she couldn't get rid of until about 1991. So she had a problem with crack from approximately 1982 or 83 to 1991.
This is just wild. I mean, the stuff that you're bringing to the table, John, is for most people that haven't had a little teaser of this kind of information, it would be so hard for them to grasp. And I know most people that listen to the Leak Project are very astute and knowledgeable, so it's not going to be tough for most of our listeners, but I can definitely see this reaching out to other people. So for those that are listening to this podcast that may not know about some of this information that John is bringing to the table, I would strongly recommend picking up a copy of Drugs as Weapons Against Us. You can go to johnpotash.com and you'll get access to it right there. And then also another book that's just got an encyclopedia of knowledge on black ops and what goes on behind the scenes is the FBI war on Tupac Shakur and black leaders. Just great stuff. You've also got DVDs as well, don't you, for those that don't have time to read?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I turned my first book into a film, also titled FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders. And they can buy it all either through my website or through Amazon. Amazon sells both my books and my DVD, a film based on the book. It's about an 85-minute film. But if you want to see my second book first, you can look at it on the shelf of Barnes & Noble. There's usually at least one Barnes & Noble in every city that has it on their bookshelf. If they don't have it on their bookshelf, they say they can get it on their bookshelf within about 2 to 4 days. So you're welcome to look at it firsthand before you buy it that way. Or you can buy a Kindle version of both books. And the second book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, is in a lot of different e-versions, Book Nook, Kindle, and all Google Books and all the different versions. But yeah, so thanks for bringing that up because if you guys want an autographed copy, of course you can buy it from my website, johnpotash.com too. So and I just want to also point out that I have in the first book's got about 1,000 endnotes citing all the sources for this material. And it's mostly mainstream sources, mostly court documents, mainstream books and articles. I did a Freedom of Information Act request for Tupac's FBI documents, and I ended up getting a Department of Justice worker to admit to me that there was over 4,000 pages in his FBI file, and that they cost about 10 cents a page to copy. So they sent me a letter asking me for the $405 to pay for all those 4,000 plus pages, but then they only sent me 99 pages, and they said for national security reasons. And so even those 99 pages were pretty redacted. So, that's what we're dealing with, and we try to get that kind of information. But I still did find some information in those FBI documents. And I also found a lot more information in the FBI documents on the rapper Biggie Smalls, just because he was much less of a threat. And I argue that he was killed as what they call collateral damage to throw the investigators of Tupac's assassination off by making it look like an East Coast versus West Coast rap war. But in Biggie's FBI file, they admit some more stuff about what happened with Tupac and the witnesses that were killed around Tupac and so on. Yeah.
Do you think that now that the way that the media has kind of changed a bit with the internet, YouTube, etc., that they're kind of letting off control a little bit, or maybe clamping down even more on those out there? Let's just talk about Taylor Swift for a minute. It seems like 10 years ago she was all happy, lovey, kind. Let's just talk about the little stuff. I got dumped by my boyfriend, and now it seems like she's getting real heavy into the dressing sexy and doing just kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. And maybe it's just for ratings. Maybe it's just for money. I mean, that's probably what it's for. But do you think that there's control with people like that as well behind the scenes?
I don't know much about Taylor Swift. I just don't know her stuff too well. And I know she reached mega stardom quickly, and God knows why. I can't say I've liked that much of what I've heard from her. But
right.
But I do. I do think there's incredible control and manipulation of the music world. And I document how that's developed and why that probably is in my book. I've got some chapters on that alone. And the mega corporations just bought up so many music labels. They bought up the rap labels, they bought up the independent rock labels, and they gained so much control that way. But the media in general, in my first book, I have 2 chapters just on the way the media was bought out and controlled by the powers that be, by the oligarchs, I call them. I quote Dean of the University of California, Berkeley School of Journalism, Ben Bagdikian, about in his book, The Media Monopoly. He documents the fact that the J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller interests bought out most of the top national newspapers around the country, and to control the newspapers that way. But then later, top banks and oil companies and defense contractors, insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies basically bought so much of the media that they entwined their boards of directors. They shared boards of directors, and in doing so, by corporate law, the media companies aren't allowed to print stuff, aren't allowed to do things that go against the profit margin of the corporations that they share boards of directors with. And that's how he described as another way that they control the media. And so he talks about, he names all the different enmeshed boards of directors of Time Incorporated, the largest media company in the world, as well as the New York Times, Washington Post, CBS, etc. But he further, another great investigation of the media was done by the Senate Church Committee in the 1970s. And they came out with the fact that well over 400 members of the media live dual lives and they work for the CIA. And that was the only place that published that finding was Rolling Stone magazine. And Watergate muckraker Carl Bernstein published that seminal article called "The CIA and the Media" about their findings. And he found, the Senate Church Committee found that the heads of virtually every media organization in the country, CBS, ABC, Newsweek, Time, etc., all live dual lives in their work for the CIA. I would highly recommend people check out that article by Carl Bernstein, which he has on his website. But I have copies of the pages from it in my book too. In my book, the FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, I think I included a copy in Drugs as Weapons Against Us. But in a final way they control the media, I show, is through the things like was pointed out by Noam Chomsky and his co-author, whose name leaves me all of a sudden, Edward Herman, who was at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business. And they, in their book Manufacturing Consent, they show how the Pentagon owns, actually publishes around 1,300 different magazines. And I argue we don't know what all those magazines are, but they likely are a lot of our mainstream magazines. And that's how they control information that way too. So these are just a few of the ways, believe it or not. There's even many more that they control our information. And the media monopoly has gotten so powerful that it's been said, many researchers have said that 6 multinational corporations basically control 95% of the information we get.
And that is so true. That is absolutely true. You can look at the names, the corporations at the very top levels and all the different sub-companies underneath them. 6 companies control over 90% of the media. It's unbelievable. And the media is so powerful that it's no wonder we've got a society of many sheep. Now, although I must say people are waking up more and more every day, and it's fantastic to see that. People like you, John, are definitely on the forefront of this. And I'll tell you, when you listen to music now, folks, you're going to listen to it at a whole different level, I'll bet. Can we jump into the CIA/Nazi/assassination links with many entertainers, etc.? And also not only entertainers, but political activists and stuff. You write a lot about this in your books.
Yeah, now the Nazi situation is there was a few operations after World War II that saved Nazis. Some of their names were Operation Paperclip, another was Sunshine. But Paperclip was specifically targeting Nazi scientists, and it brought about 1,000 Nazi scientists over from Germany to the United States to work on different programs. And now, as I said, my book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, is centered around the MKUltra program, and in many of these Nazi scientists from Operation Paperclip became part of the MKUltra program. Now, thousands of these scientists, thousands of these Nazis were also sent down to Latin America, and that's been documented in a number of mainstream places. New York Times talked about that, and so there's plenty of award-winning books that talk about both Paperclip and Operation Sunshine. And now in Latin America, they developed these colonies in various countries, and in these colonies were very powerful. And there was a colony. New York Times came out in about 2005 or 6 with articles about a Nazi doctor named Peter Schaefer who started a colony in Chile, and they said that that colony was so powerful that Chilean airplanes were not even allowed to fly over it. It had a huge country's worth of arms and ammunition and weapons. It had torture chambers where it helped U.S.-supported Chilean dictator Pinochet torture leftists who were rivals to his leadership. And so and another thing that it did was those colonies helped the cocaine trafficking that the CIA was doing from that region, and they were a major part of that. They helped what was called the Bolivian cocaine coup, to bring in a cocaine lord as the new leader of Bolivia, a right-wing dictator. And then those countries also became part of what was Operation Condor, which was a CIA-sponsored assassination program that was involved about 9 different Latin American countries. It was centered around Argentina and Chile, but 7 other countries joined Operation Condor, and they literally went around the world killing off Latin American leftists if they went to other countries. They even came into the United States and assassinated what was Salvador Allende, the former leader, the democratically elected leader of Chile, who Pinochet overthrew. They killed one of his ministers, one of his high-level presidential cabinet members in Washington, D.C. with a car bomb. He killed an American in that car bombing, too. And these guys were literally, they got off because of their connections to the CIA. So that's some of what was going on with that. But so in Latin America, they were helping the cocaine trafficking. In the United States, the Nazi scientists were helping with MK Ultra and helping with the use of psychedelics and other drugs against different activists. But Nazis were used in other parts of the world also by U.S. and British intelligence.
You know, I even remember talking to somebody that worked with CERN, NASA, and other Department of Defense institutions. He actually has a patent on night vision generation 3. The guy's brilliant. He's 89, and he made these tubes essentially that went into space, went into CERN. And he was a part of he knew people that were brought in from Project Paperclip. And I asked him about that specifically. And he goes, yeah, I don't know what it was called, but I remember working with many people that came over after the war from, that were Nazis, and they were just extremely intelligent. But he didn't do the MK Ultra type stuff. He was working on tech for, for cameras, essentially vacuum tubes. But man, I'll tell you, you are bringing just so much info to the table. Do you have any knowledge on like Satanism running amok? Because there's so much out there that says this is done for like satanic rituals, but I'm wondering if it's just done to shut somebody up, and they use that as like we're Satanists, or maybe there's a combination of both.
Well, Dave McGowan, I think, does good work on this. I don't get into the Satanism except to say that I quote some good sources, including a guy who gave a lecture to a huge group of counselors, hypnosis experts around the kind of north, I think it was the northeast region of the country. Big conference. He gave a lecture to a big conference. His name leaves me right now, but he was a hypnosis expert himself, and he found that the Process Church, when they ritually and satanically abuse kids, they used a kind of a way of doing it that exactly replicated the CIA's MK Ultra program's project when abusing kids and causing dissociative identity disorder in kids. And I quote a federal hearing under President Clinton, where a counselor brought 2 of her clients or patients to that hearing, who both said, we went through this ritual abuse at the hands of the CIA to become CIA assets. And this counselor said when she was only given a week to prepare for this hearing, and but while in that course of that week, 40 other counselors called her from around the country to say that they had clients that they counseled that had the same experience, that they were ritually abused, given drugs, LSD and other drugs, and to turn them into dissociative identity disorder victims. Dissociative identity disorder is a new term for what was used to be called multiple personality disorder. And so by abusing them at a key age, between the ages of 3 and 8 years old, you can split the mind so that you can develop people into assets that way without them even realizing what they're fully what they're doing in different personality states. And so these women, after a lot of good counseling, they were able to get in touch with all that had gone on with them. And so then this national lecturer, Gordon Hammond, said that these same techniques used by the CIA were exactly replicated by some of these satanic type cults, such as the Process Church. And the Process Church was active in a number of different states. They were particularly active in California and around the San Francisco area. And the Manson family was said to be part of the Process Church, and had used that. And Manson had used that to control the women that did that work for him. but it was used in a number of other places too. The Process Church to have like a kind of a front company, a front group that would do the same thing as the CIA, but it couldn't be as easily traced back to the CIA by having these cults supposedly doing this satanic ritual abuse.
Well, and also I've heard that there's a lot of connections with Manson and ties with the government. Have you done much research into that?
Yeah, well, I think I didn't do such firsthand research on that. I went through Dave McGowan's research on that and some other people's research on that. And I didn't see so many direct connections between Manson and the government as I saw more the indirect, connections with the Process Church, except for the fact of this Squeaky Fromm and her having some strange connections to the government and her trying to shoot Gerald Ford. It's hard to explain what that was all about, but yeah, I just don't. I get into it maybe a page on Manson, but not. I didn't get heavily into Manson. Sorry about that.
That's fine. I had just heard that before, and that was one thing I didn't know if you'd looked into. And I got to tell you, John, it's just been a pleasure to speak with you. I know our audience is really going to enjoy this podcast. And once again, I'd recommend our listeners go to johnpotash.com. You'll have access to drugs as weapons against us, the CIA's murderous targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and other leftists. Also, you'll have access to the FBI war on Tupac Shakur and black leaders. And before we close out tonight, John, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? And thank you again for coming on the show.
You're very welcome, Rex. Well, I guess, since I did mention SDS, Students for Democratic Society, they'd become the largest student anti-war group in the country, and it had gotten up to 100,000 members, and it's sad that they were basically dismantled by MK Ultra and and FBI and CIA infiltrators that just had a lot of different techniques for hurting them. But one of the ways they hurt them was to try to manipulate a number of them to start using drugs. And I showed the evidence that an FBI undercover agent actually got the head of the Columbia University SDS, I forget his name off the top, Mark Rudd, and his group that were so successful and such role models for taking over the administration offices of Columbia University. They vowed not to use LSD, saying they thought it was anti-revolutionary, but an undercover agent, his group, a guy named George Demley and the Crazies, which was kind of an offshoot group of the Yippies, which was Abby Hoffman's group, ended up dosing them at a party. And so that's just one example of what they did in trying to get these white anti-war activists and civil rights activists tripping and divert them or hurt their minds for their best. So they took them away from their best actions. And Mark Rudd and Bernie Dorn and others ended up becoming part of the Weather Underground. It used to be called the Weathermen. They changed the name to Weather Underground. And I say that they were well-meaning people who did some good actions to help stop the war and were very brave and courageous in trying to do what they did. But their minds were hurt by the acid. And so at the first Weather Underground conference, they lauded Charles Manson and his followers. Because they were just so messed up on acid. And even lauded Sirhan, who assassinated RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, sadly enough, because their minds were so messed up from the acid. So it's too bad the acid hurt their best abilities to do some of the work that they did.
Absolutely. It's just, and I've heard of people before that have done acid and it took them to another level mentally, but they only did it a couple of times. And I know people personally from 25 years ago that are probably, I haven't seen them in years, but they're probably still just messed up out of their minds, because I know one guy in particular that had almost a sheet of acid at one time. And that's just insanity, absolute insanity. So, I wonder real quick, John, before we close, I wonder if the reason they do that kind of stuff is to make it easier to control the masses. I feel that most of the vaccines today have so many poisons in them that they have the opposite effect. And it seems like they make it a global scale. You've got to have 50 vaccines by the time you're 18 if you want to go to public school. And I think that maybe they do this at a top level to just make it easier to control the masses.
Yeah, I think so for sure. I didn't talk about the vaccines in my book, though I've talked to people that are leaders of major groups, groups that are concerned about the vaccines. They're not anti-vaccine, but they're concerned about the additives of vaccines, for sure. And there are lots of reasons to be. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. does great work around vaccines. But I think with acid, I tried acid about half a dozen times. It hurt my grades drastically for about a year. And I think I lost an ability I just never got back, even though after about a year I started to get my, kind of my abilities back again. I never got back one particular ability, but And I've counseled loads of people that have eaten, have taken acid, and I've just heard so many testimonies of problems with acid, and I showed the research that the Army's own research on the 1,000 Edgewood Arsenal soldiers who they tested LSD with. A quarter of them said even 19 years later they still felt like they had long-term negative effects from the LSD. So I just show it's just bad news. It causes mild problems, but those problems keep accumulating the more and more acid you do. And so if you've done it, get away from it. If you haven't done it, don't go for it. So that's the best thing I can say to
Good advice.
close things up. Yeah. And I'll just say, lastly, ecstasy is the same kind of problems, the same kind of mild cerebral damage appears to be happening with ecstasy, and actually possibly a more dangerous way, they say. But for memory, but either way, ecstasy and acid have been shown to be some of the most serious problems, brain-wise, while heroin and cocaine obviously are the biggest problems for addiction, and speed are the biggest problems for hardcore addictions.
Well, this has just been great. Once again, John, thank you for coming on the show. And folks, remember, check out johnpotash.com. Also, check out our website, leadproject.com. And if you become a contributing member, you'll get access to exclusive content. Also, subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and be the change you want to see.
John, Potash, CIA, FBI, Mafia, MK Ultra, Secret Drug War, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, MLK, Malcolm X, Marley, 27 Club, latest Leak Project. Subscribe today.
Folks, we have a real treat for you tonight. We have John Potash with us from johnpotash.com. We are going to discuss drugs as weapons against us, the CIA's murderous targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists. John, it's an honor to speak with you today here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Good. Thanks so much for talking to me about it, Rex.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit before the show. I'm fascinated with your work. I remember many years ago when Tupac got killed, and he seemed to be kind of on the forefront of many conspiracies for his day, or what we would call conspiracies now. And I remember the 27 Club. I researched that quite in depth, and it seems like these famous entertainers, they die at the age of 27. It's weird. And I don't know if there's any connection there with what you talk about. But if you would, please, for our audience, just give us a brief intro about yourself and why you decided to write about this stuff, because it's pretty intense.
Sure. Yeah, I've just I graduated from college with a psychology major and went into addictions counseling, and then went back to school to the Columbia University School of Social Welfare because I knew I could study both counseling and sociology there, particularly under a great sociologist named Richard Cloward. And so I did that, and I studied community organizing, counseling, and sociology, and started a activist national social work newspaper there called Social Justice Action Quarterly, which won some awards in its brief 4 years. But then I got into publishing a few articles on Tupac and his, what I first thought was his targeting before he died, and what I thought was an FBI, COINTELPRO, FBI counterintelligence program targeting. But then after he died, I published a more extensive piece in Covert Action Quarterly, which was started by CIA whistleblower Phil Agee. And when I published that, people close to him urged me to turn it into a book. And so I had been working on a book with a theme of drugs as weapons against us, and Tupac was just one of a number of people that I was researching in that book. And that book was more about both Tupac, but also John Lennon, Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, and other musicians. And that was really, that book was going to become Drugs as Weapons Against Us, but I took a tangent and instead finished a book just on Tupac, which became The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, and came out with that in fall of 2007, and got a lot of good feedback on that. Promoted it for a number of years, and then found a publisher for the first book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and I published that about a year ago with Trine Day. And so I've been on, I guess I've been broadcast on close to 1,000 radio programs, because I've had some great, I've gone through a number of radio programs on the Pacifica Radio Network, but also was on Coast to Coast AM and Joyce Riley's Power Hour and a number of other syndicated radio programs that got me a lot of exposure on the FBI War on Tupac book, but then also on the Drugs as Weapons Against Us book.
When you started writing about this stuff, did you start getting kickback? I mean, did you notice black Suburbans slowly going past your house? Did you notice your phone going click, 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 click?
Well, I did have problems with my phone. I had problems with my mail. I had problems connecting with other, for example, a professor who wanted to do public relations for me. We couldn't connect by email all of a sudden at all. People I would send my the book, the FBI War on Tupac book, to, such as Joe Madison, who was a friend of this professor's, he never got it, or people who he told me to send it to, they would get the package without the book in it. Different things like that happened.
That's spooky.
So yeah, that was worrisome. But now my phone doesn't work at all today. I just, who knows why, but it's it's these things just happen here and there, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I'm still trying to get the word out, and sadly, it is a little scary just because of the people that have tried to get closest to the truth on Tupac's murder. Many of them have died, and the people that have written the most and the best works, I think, on the CIA's Operation MK Ultra, which is what my Drugs as Weapons Against Us book is kind of built around. Many of them have died also, so it is a little worrisome.
Jeez, may the force be with you, man. I'm thinking of that TV series Stranger Days that recently came out on Netflix, and they full on show you all sorts of MK Ultra stuff that used to be done back in the day. I know they've got their own Hollywood spin to it, but let's jump into your work, because I'm looking through some of these bullet points right now, and I'm just getting blown away by looking at this stuff, the connections that you've made. Let's talk about how you were able to find out that the U.S. intelligence has been the largest LSD trafficker in the world. I remember back 20 years ago, 25 years ago in high school when, every once in a while you'd see somebody that was tripping on acid or something like that. And I heard rumors that LSD, if you got caught with a hit of acid, it was a manslaughter charge. Yeah,
I tell you, I have some of the source books right around me. So I can pull some of them out for you if you want. One of the best source books for my work was Martin Lee, founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting's book, Acid Dreams. I don't know if you can see it here, but I got that right here.
Uh-huh.
Another book, an excellent book, is Operation Julie by Dick Lee and Colin Pratt. Dick Lee was the lead investigator, high-level police detective in London, who investigated the LSD ring that Ronald Stark was part of. And now Ronald Stark was arrested in Italy because he had LSD laboratories around the world. And when he was arrested in Italy, a judge who was presiding over his trial ended up being murdered. And the next judge that was dealing with his case ended up saying he let him go because Stark offered so many proofs that he was working for the CIA, or U.S. intelligence, I should say, since 1960. And so there's Acid Dreams talks about Ronald Stark. Another book called Acid talks about Ronald Stark. Operation Julie talks about Ronald Stark, and they all talk about him as working for U.S. intelligence and the largest acid trafficker in the world. And it names a number of other people involved in his network and their links to U.S. intelligence and the CIA's acid trafficking, yeah.
Jeez. And so they started to give acid to specific people because they wanted to just basically see what it would do to them?
Well, it's Operation MK Ultra started in 1953. And there was, the list is huge, but it's probably around 100 sub-projects of Operation MK Ultra. But in the 1950s, they started with testing about 24 different drugs, and I list them in my book from the Army intelligence paper and their paper on the 1,000 or more Edgewood Arsenal soldiers who they tested all these 24 different drugs on. And then they surveyed them for years. And so they found that of all the drugs they were testing for use as quote-unquote unconventional warfare, they found that LSD was the one they most prized. And when they then started using them on hospital patients and people in jail, and also the common citizens. Now, it eventually got to the point that it became more and more operational to start getting musicians to use them, and that was revealed by A.E. Hotchner. A.E. Hotchner was editor of Ernest Hemingway. He was a great writer himself. He wrote a book called Blown Away, An Oral History of the Rolling Stones. And in that book, he says that Robert Lashbrook, was deputy